behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of royal tradition echo through marble halls, a moment was about to unfold that would change everything. The cameras were ready, the world was watching, and two figures who had once walked away from it all were about to step back into the spotlight. This wasn't just another royal celebration. It was the night that would test whether love, forgiveness, and family could triumph over years of silence, scandal, and separation. The November air carried a crisp chill through the streets of London as Harry adjusted his formal military dress uniform one final time. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of what this evening represented. Standing beside him, Meghan smoothed down her elegant navy dress, the same shade she had worn to their engagement announcement years earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Are you ready for this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of arriving guests and clicking cameras. Harry looked at her, seeing the same woman who had changed his life forever. Yet somehow she seemed different now. Stronger, more determined. The woman who had once been terrified of royal protocol now stood with the confidence of someone who had faced the worst and survived. "I don't think anyone could ever be ready for this," he replied honestly. "But we're here, together." The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier, delivered by a courier who had waited while Harry signed for it personally. The cream-colored envelope bore the unmistakable royal seal, and inside, in the formal language that had once been so familiar, was a request for their presence at Prince Charles's 70th birthday celebration. Not a command, as it might have been in the past, but a genuine invitation from a father to his son. Meghan had found Harry sitting in their California kitchen that morning, staring at the invitation as if it might disappear if he looked away. The sunlight streamed through their windows, illuminating the words that had the power to change everything. "He wants us there," Harry had said simply. "What do you want?" Meghan had asked, settling beside him at the table they had chosen together, in the home they had built away from all of this. It had taken Harry 3 days to answer that question honestly. 3 days of walking their dogs along the beaches of Montecito, of late-night conversations over tea, of FaceTime calls with friends who understood the weight of this decision. In the end, it wasn't duty that called him back. It was love. Now, as their car approached the palace gates, Harry found himself remembering other arrivals, other celebrations. There had been a time when this place felt like home, when these walls held nothing but familiarity and comfort. That was before the interviews, before the documentaries, before the books and articles and endless speculation about every word, every gesture, every photograph. The palace appeared before them in all its majestic glory, illuminated against the dark London sky. Harry noticed that Meghan's breathing had changed, becoming more measured and deliberate. She was using the techniques they had learned together, the ways of staying centered when the world around you felt like it was spinning. "Look," she said quietly, pointing toward the entrance where a familiar figure stood. William was there, greeting guests as they arrived, his wife Catherine beside him. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Two brothers who had once been inseparable, who had faced the loss of their mother together, who had shared secrets and laughter and dreams, now stood on opposite sides of a divide that sometimes felt impossible to cross. Their car pulled up to the red carpet, and immediately the atmosphere changed. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, and Harry could hear the shouts of photographers calling their names. But something was different this time. The energy felt less aggressive, more curious than hostile. Perhaps the world, like his father, was ready for this reunion. The door opened, and Harry stepped out first, immediately turning to help Meghan. As her hand touched his, he felt a surge of the same electricity that had sparked between them on their first date. Some things, he realized, never change. They began walking toward the entrance, and Harry could see his brother watching them approach. William's expression was unreadable, the same poker face he had perfected during years of public appearances. But Harry had known that face since childhood, and he could see something else there, nervousness, perhaps even hope. "Harry, Meghan," a voice called out, and they turned to see some of their former royal protection officers, men who had once been responsible for their safety and had become something like friends. The warmth in their greetings reminded Harry that not all bridges had been burned. As they continued toward the entrance, guests began to notice their arrival. There were members of Parliament, foreign dignitaries, celebrities, and, of course, family. Each face told a story of relationships that had been strained, friendships that had been tested, and loyalties that had been questioned. Meghan squeezed Harry's hand as they approached a group of his cousins. Eugenie and Beatrice were there, along with Peter Phillips and Zara Tindall. These were the people who had welcomed Meghan into the family with genuine warmth, who had celebrated at their wedding, and who had been caught in the middle when everything fell apart. "It's so good to see you both," Eugenie said, stepping forward to embrace them. Her hug lasted a moment longer than protocol required, and Harry understood that this was her way of saying that family meant more than headlines. As they moved through the crowd, Harry began to relax slightly. Yes, there were awkward moments and stilted conversations, but there's also genuine warmth from people who remembered why they had loved having Harry and Meghan as part of their world. Then he saw her, his grandmother's lady-in-waiting, who had been with the royal family for over 50 years. She approached them with the same dignity she had shown him as a child, when she would slip him extra biscuits during formal teas. "Your Royal Highness," she said to Harry, then turned to Meghan with a smile. "Mrs. Sussex, how lovely that you could be here tonight." It was such a small gesture, the use of Meghan's preferred title, but it spoke volumes about the evening ahead. This wasn't going to be about protocol and punishment. It was going to be about family. Harry's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced down to see a text from his father's private secretary. "HRH would like to see you both privately before the formal celebration begins. Please come to the blue drawing room when you're ready." Harry showed the message to Meghan, and he saw her take a deep breath. This was the moment they had both been preparing for, the conversation that would set the tone for everything that followed. They made their way through the palace corridors that Harry knew by heart, past portraits of ancestors and rooms filled with memories. Meghan walked beside him, taking in details she had once known so well. The way the light fell across certain paintings, the sound their footsteps made on the ancient wooden floors, the scent of fresh flowers that always filled these halls. Outside the blue drawing room, they paused. Harry could hear voices inside, his father's distinctive tone, and others he couldn't quite identify. This was it. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether this evening was the beginning of healing or simply a polite performance for the cameras. Harry reached for the door handle, then stopped and looked at Meghan one more time. She nodded, and together they stepped into the room where Prince Charles stood waiting, older than Harry remembered, but with eyes that held the same mixture of love and concern they had always carried when he looked at his youngest son. "Harry," Charles said simply. "Meghan, thank you for coming." The formality in his voice couldn't hide the emotion underneath, and Harry realized that his father was just as nervous as they were. This wasn't the king speaking to former working royals. This was a father hoping to reconnect with his son and daughter-in-law. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Harry had expected. There were no accusations, no demands for explanations. Instead, Charles spoke about time, how it had given him perspective, how it had helped him understand choices that had once seemed incomprehensible. He talked about being a grandfather to children he rarely saw, about watching interviews where his son spoke about struggles he wished he could have helped with. Meghan spoke too, with the grace and honesty that had first drawn Harry to her. She talked about the difficulty of their decision to leave, about the love they still felt for the family and the institution, about their hopes for their children to know their grandfather and their heritage. As the conversation continued, Harry began to understand something important. This wasn't about erasing the past or pretending that hurt hadn't happened. This was about acknowledging that families are complicated, that love can survive even when understanding fails, and that sometimes coming home means accepting that home has changed. The door opened, and William appeared, having been summoned by their father. The brothers looked at each other across the room, and Harry saw something in William's face that he hadn't seen in years. His big brother, the one who had taught him to ride a bike and had held him when their mother died. "Hello, Harry," William said quietly. "Hello, William." It wasn't a Hollywood reunion with tears and dramatic embraces. It was something more real and more valuable. Two men who had been boys together, acknowledging that they were ready to try again. The formal celebration was about to begin, and as they prepared to join the other guests, Harry realized that this evening had already exceeded his hopes. Not because everything was perfect or all problems were solved, but because they had remembered what it felt like to be a family. Charles adjusted his formal jacket and looked at his sons, standing together for the first time in years. "Shall we?" he asked. Together, the four of them walked toward the door, toward a celebration that had become something much more significant than a birthday party. It had become a homecoming. The state ballroom had been transformed into something magical. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across tables adorned with white roses and gold accents, while soft classical music provided an elegant backdrop to the gentle murmur of conversation. Harry paused at the entrance, taking in the sight of nearly 200 guests who represented decades of his father's relationships. Politicians, artists, environmental activists, religious leaders, and family members from across Europe. "It's beautiful," Meghan whispered, and Harry could hear genuine appreciation in her voice. She had always loved these grand royal occasions when they were celebrations of genuine achievement rather than mere obligation. Their entrance didn't go unnoticed. Conversations paused momentarily as guests registered their presence, but rather than the uncomfortable stares Harry had expected, he saw mostly smiles and nods of welcome. It seemed word of their private family reunion had somehow spread, creating an atmosphere of celebration rather than tension. "Harry, Meghan." The voice belonged to David Beckham, who approached them with his characteristic warmth. Behind him, Victoria smiled genuinely, a reminder that some friendships had survived the upheaval of their departure from royal life. "David, Victoria, how wonderful to see you," Meghan said, accepting Victoria's embrace. The two women had developed a genuine friendship during Meghan's time in London, bonding over their shared experience of intense media scrutiny and the challenges of raising children in the public eye. As they chatted, Harry became aware that they were being watched by someone across the room. He turned to see his grandmother's former private secretary, a woman who had been like a second mother to him during his teenage years. When their eyes met, she raised her champagne glass slightly in what he recognized as a gesture of approval. The evening's formal program began with a string quartet performing some of Charles's favorite classical pieces. Harry found himself seated at a table with family friends he hadn't seen in years, people who had known him since childhood and who greeted him with the easy familiarity of those who remembered him before he became a global celebrity. Lady Sarah Chatto, his aunt and one of his mother's closest friends, leaned over during the musical interlude. "Your mother would be so proud to see you here tonight," she said quietly. "She always said that family was everything, even when it's complicated." The comment hit Harry unexpectedly hard. Throughout all the difficulties of recent years, he had sometimes wondered what his mother would have thought of his choices. Lady Sarah's words reminded him that Diana had always prioritized love and authenticity over duty and tradition. Across the table, Meghan was engaged in animated conversation with one of Charles's environmental advisors about sustainable farming practices. Harry smiled, watching her passion for causes she believed in shine through. This was the woman who had captured his heart, someone who could discuss policy with world leaders and then immediately turn to ask about someone's grandchildren with equal interest and sincerity. The first speech of the evening came from the Archbishop of Canterbury, who spoke about Charles's decades of service and his commitment to interfaith dialogue. As he spoke, Harry found himself really listening to the words, hearing his father's accomplishments described with genuine admiration rather than the dutiful praise he was used to. "Prince Charles has always understood," the Archbishop said, "that true leadership means bringing people together, finding common ground even in the midst of disagreement, and never giving up hope that understanding is possible." Harry glanced at Meghan, knowing they were both thinking the same thing. These words felt like they were meant for more than just a celebration. They were a blueprint for the kind of family relationships they all wanted to rebuild. When Charles rose to give his own speech, the room fell silent with the kind of respectful attention reserved for moments of genuine significance. Harry had heard his father speak hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. There was a vulnerability in Charles's voice that Harry rarely heard in public. Tonight, as I look around this room at the faces of people who have enriched my life in countless ways, I'm reminded that the greatest privilege of my 70 years has been the opportunity to serve, to learn, and to grow, Charles began. I've made mistakes, as we all have. I've had to learn that sometimes the hardest conversations are the most necessary ones, and that pride should never be more important than love. Harry felt his throat tighten as his father continued. Family's not perfect. It's not meant to be, but it's meant to be forgiving, and it's meant to be strong enough to survive even our worst moments. Charles's eyes found Harry's across the room, and for a moment, it felt like they were the only two people there. To my sons, who have taught me as much as I hope I've taught them, thank you for reminding me that being a father is more important than any other title I'll ever hold. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, but Harry barely heard it. He was thinking about all the conversations they should have had years ago, all the misunderstandings that had grown larger in silence, all the time they had lost to pride and hurt feelings. As the evening progressed, Harry found himself in conversations that gradually became more personal and meaningful. His cousin Peter Phillips pulled him aside to talk about their children, sharing photos and stories with the easy camaraderie they had shared as teenagers. Zara Tyndall hugged him tightly and whispered, "We've missed you, cousin." But it was his conversation with his stepmother Camilla that surprised him most. She approached him during a break between courses, her manner more direct than he remembered. "I know this can't be easy for you," she said without preamble. "Coming back to all this after everything that's happened." Harry appreciated her honesty. "It's not easy," he agreed, "but it's important. Your father has missed you terribly," she continued. "More than he would ever admit, even to me. He reads every article about you, and Meghan watches every interview. He's so proud of the work you're doing, but he's heartbroken that he can't tell you that himself." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several dignitaries who wanted to speak with Harry about his Invictus Games Foundation. As he found himself explaining the program to a group that included 2 foreign ministers and an Olympic Committee chairman, Harry realized how much his perspective had changed. Once these conversations would have been about duty and representing the crown. Now, they were about work he was genuinely passionate about, causes he had chosen rather than inherited. Meghan joined their group, seamlessly adding her own insights about veteran mental health programs they had visited in the United States. Harry watched as she commanded the attention of the group with her knowledge and passion, and he felt a surge of pride in the woman he had married and the partnership they had built together. As the evening continued, the atmosphere grew progressively warmer and more relaxed. Harry noticed that William had been watching him from across the room, and when their eyes met, his brother nodded toward a quieter corner. They moved away from the main celebration, finding themselves in an alcove where they had often talked as children. "This is strange," William said with a slight smile. "Very strange," Harry agreed. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both remembering countless other family gatherings where they had escaped together when the formal parts became too overwhelming. "Catherine wanted me to tell you that she's sorry she couldn't spend more time with Meghan tonight," William said. "She's been dealing with the children's schedules, and—" "You don't need to explain," Harry interrupted. "We understand. Maybe next time." The words "next time" hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement that they both hoped this evening wouldn't be an isolated occurrence. "I want you to know," William continued, "that I never wanted things to get as bad as they did. I made mistakes too." Harry looked at his brother, really looked at him for the first time in years. He saw the weight William carried, the pressure of knowing he would one day be king, the burden of always trying to do the right thing, even when it was impossible to know what that was. "We both did," Harry replied. "But we're here now." The brothers were interrupted by the arrival of several of their cousins, and soon they found themselves in the kind of easy group conversation that had been such a big part of their family life growing up. Stories were shared, old jokes were remembered, and for a few moments, it felt like no time had passed at all. As the formal dinner portion of the evening began to wind down, guests started to move around more freely. Harry found himself in conversation with some of his father's oldest friends, people who had known the royal family for decades, and who offered perspectives he hadn't considered. "Your father talked about you constantly when you were in Afghanistan," one of Charles's military advisors told him. "He was terrified for your safety, but he was also so proud that you were serving. He understood why you needed to do that, even when he wished you didn't have to." These conversations were revelations to Harry, showing him aspects of his father's feelings that had never been directly communicated. He began to understand how much love had been present even during their most difficult periods, hidden beneath layers of protocol, pride, and simple failure to communicate. Meanwhile, Meghan had found herself in a corner with several women who had known Diana, including Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's sister. They were sharing memories and stories that helped Meghan understand more about the woman who would have been her mother-in-law. "She would have adored you," Lady Sarah told her. "Diana always said she hoped her boys would find women who would challenge them to be better, who would bring their own strength to the family rather than just accepting what was already there." As the evening moved toward its conclusion, Harry realized that something fundamental had shifted. Not everything was resolved. There were still conversations to be had, still hurt feelings to work through, still practical issues to navigate. But the foundation was there again, the basic understanding that they were family, and that family meant something worth fighting for. The last formal speech of the evening came from William, speaking on behalf of the family. Harry listened as his brother talked about their father's dedication, his vision for the monarchy, and his commitment to service. But what struck Harry most was when William spoke about family itself. "Family," William said, "is not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about showing up even when it's hard. It's about believing that love is stronger than disagreement, and that home is wherever the people who matter most are willing to welcome you back." As applause filled the room, Harry felt Meghan's hand find his under the table. They had made the right decision to come tonight. Not because everything was perfect, but because they had remembered what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be part of something larger than themselves, to have a family that would always be there, even when the relationship was complicated. The evening was drawing to a close, but Harry could feel that this was really just the beginning of something new. As the formal dinner concluded, guests began to drift toward the adjoining drawing rooms where coffee and after-dinner drinks were being served. The atmosphere had grown notably more relaxed, with small groups forming and reforming as conversations flowed from one topic to another. Harry found himself separated from Meghan for the first time that evening as different people drew them into various discussions. He was standing near one of the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens when his aunt approached him. Princess and had always been one of his favorite relatives, direct, honest, and completely unimpressed by ceremony when it got in the way of substance. "Well," she said without preamble, "this evening has been less of a disaster than some people predicted." Harry couldn't help but smile. "High praise from you, Aunt Anne." "Don't get cheeky with me," she replied, but her eyes were twinkling. "I'm glad you came. Your father needed this more than he would ever admit." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching through the windows as security personnel moved through the gardens, and had always been someone who understood the weight of duty, but also the importance of family relationships that existed separate from those obligations. "You know," she continued, "when you left, I understood it. Not everyone did, but I remembered what it was like to be young and feel trapped by expectations that seemed impossible to meet." Harry looked at her with surprise, and had always seemed so perfectly suited to royal life, so completely in control of her role and responsibilities. "Oh yes," she said, noticing his expression. "There was a time when I thought about walking away from all of this. Different circumstances, different era, but the same basic question: how much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice for something you never chose?" Before Harry could respond, They were joined by his cousin Peter, who had clearly had a few glasses of wine and was in an unusually talkative mood. "Harry," Peter said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We need to talk about Christmas. Mum's been driving everyone crazy asking whether you and Meghan might come to Sandringham this year. Apparently, she's already planning where to put the children's presents." The casualness of the invitation hit Harry unexpectedly hard. For years, Christmas at Sandringham had been a given, as automatic as breathing. Then, it had become impossible, a symbol of everything they had left behind. Now, suddenly, it was being offered again as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know," Harry said honestly. "We'd have to think about it, talk about what would work for everyone." "Of course," Peter said, "but just know that you're wanted there. All of you." Across the room, Meghan was having her own revealing conversation with the Duchess of Gloucester, one of the hardest-working and most respected members of the extended royal family. They had been discussing Meghan's work with women's shelters in California when the Duchess made an observation that stopped Meghan in her tracks. "You know, my dear, what you're doing now is exactly what this family needs more of," the Duchess said. "Work that comes from genuine passion rather than mere obligation. The monarchy will only survive if it continues to evolve, if it finds ways to be relevant to ordinary people's lives." "But I thought," Meghan began, then stopped herself. She had assumed that her departure from royal duties would be seen as a rejection of everything the institution stood for. "Oh, my dear girl," the Duchess continued, "did you think we were all mindless traditionalists who never questioned anything? Some of us have been hoping for exactly the kind of change you represent. Not revolution, but evolution. Not abandoning tradition, but making it meaningful for a new generation." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several other guests, but the Duchess's words stayed with Meghan. She began to wonder whether the divisions she had perceived were as absolute as she had believed. Meanwhile, Harry found himself in an unexpected conversation with two of his father's environmental advisors, who had heard about his sustainable tourism initiatives in California. What started as polite small talk quickly became an animated discussion about conservation strategies and community development. "You know," one of them said, "your father has been following your work very closely. He's incredibly proud of what you're accomplishing, and he thinks there might be ways to connect what you're doing with some of his initiatives here." The idea of collaboration rather than separation was intriguing to Harry. He had always assumed that leaving royal life meant leaving behind any possibility of working with his family on shared causes. But perhaps that assumption had been too simplistic. As the evening progressed, Harry began to notice the subtle ways that his family members were going out of their way to make both him and Meghan feel welcome. His cousin Eugenie made sure to include Meghan in every conversation she joined. His uncle Edward spent considerable time asking Harry about his documentary work and expressing genuine interest in the subjects he was exploring. Most surprisingly, his grandfather's private secretary approached him with a message that left him speechless. "His Royal Highness asked me to tell you that he's been watching your interviews and documentaries. He wanted you to know that he's proud of your honesty and your courage, even when he hasn't always agreed with your choices." The fact that his grandfather, now in his late 90s and representing the most traditional aspects of royal life, could find value in Harry's very public struggles with royal expectations was something he hadn't dared to hope for. The most significant moment of the evening, however, came when Harry found himself alone with his father for the first time since their initial reunion earlier that evening. Charles had appeared beside him during a lull in the celebrations, and together they had stepped out onto one of the palace balconies. The London skyline spread out before them, familiar and timeless. Father and son stood in silence for a few moments, both processing the emotions of the evening. "I want you to know," Charles said finally, "that I understand now why you felt you had to leave. I didn't at the time, and I'm sorry for that." Harry felt a knot in his chest that he hadn't even realized was there begin to loosen. "I'm sorry too, Papa, for the way it happened, for the things that were said publicly, for the pain it caused." Charles nodded. "We both made mistakes, but you're here now, and that's what matters." They talked about practical things, then about security arrangements for future visits, about ways to maintain better communication, about how to help their children know each other despite the distance. But underneath those practical considerations was something more important. The understanding that they both wanted to rebuild their relationship, even if they weren't sure exactly how to do it. "Your mother would be happy to see this," Charles said as they prepared to rejoin the celebration. "She always said that love could survive anything if people were willing to keep trying." Back inside, the evening was beginning to wind down, but the energy remained warm and positive. Harry noticed that several guests were making a point of seeking out both him and Meghan to say goodbye personally, as if they wanted to ensure that this connection wouldn't be lost again. Lord Guyte, his grandmother's former private secretary, pulled him aside for a brief but meaningful conversation. "Your grandmother always said that the strength of this family was its ability to adapt and survive," he told Harry. "What you and Meghan are doing, building a life that honors both your heritage and your own values, that's exactly the kind of adaptation she meant." As the guests began to depart, Harry found himself thinking about how different this evening had been from his expectations. He had anticipated awkwardness, stilted conversations, and careful politeness. Instead, he had found genuine warmth, honest communication, and the beginning of real understanding. Meghan appeared beside him, looking tired but genuinely happy. "Ready to go?" she asked. "Almost," Harry replied. He wanted to find William one more time before they left. He found his brother near the entrance, saying goodbye to some of the political guests who had attended. When William saw Harry approaching, he excused himself and walked over. "Thank you," Harry said simply, "for tonight, for the way you welcomed us, for giving this a chance." William smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the brother who had been Harry's best friend throughout their childhood. "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy." They embraced then, briefly but genuinely, and Harry felt another piece of the puzzle of their relationship fall back into place. It wasn't the effortless closeness they had once shared, but it was a beginning. As Harry and Meghan finally prepared to leave, Charles appeared one last time. "I hope this won't be the last time we see you for a while," he said. "Perhaps you might consider spending some time here over the holidays, if you're comfortable with that." The invitation was tentative, hopeful rather than demanding. Harry appreciated that his father was giving them space to make their own decisions rather than assuming their presence. "We'll talk about it," Harry said. "But yes, I'd like that." As their car pulled away from the palace, Harry and Meghan sat in comfortable silence, both processing the events of the evening. Through the windows, they could see photographers still gathered outside the gates, but somehow their presence seemed less intrusive than usual. "That was," Meghan began, then stopped, searching for the right words. "Better than we expected," Harry suggested. "Much better. Your family, when they're not worried about protocol and public perception, they're actually quite wonderful." Harry smiled. "They are. I've forgotten that sometimes." As London passed by outside their windows, Harry felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of having both the life he had chosen and the family he had been born into. It wouldn't be simple, and there would still be challenges to navigate, but tonight had proved that love really could be stronger than difference, and that sometimes coming home was possible even when you thought you had burned all the bridges behind you. The evening had been more than a celebration of his father's birthday. It had been a celebration of the possibility of forgiveness, understanding, and the kind of family relationships that could survive even the most difficult circumstances. As they headed back to their hotel, Harry found himself looking forward to the future in a way he hadn't in a very long time. The London morning dawned gray and drizzling, typical for November, but Harry woke with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. Beside him, Meghan was already awake, scrolling through her phone with a look of amazement on her face. "You need to see this," she said, handing him the device. Harry expected to see the usual mixture of criticism and support that followed any public appearance they made. Instead, he found himself reading headline after headline that focused not on drama or conflict, but on reconciliation and hope. "Royal family reunites for Charles's 70th," read one. Harry and Meghan's warm welcome home, proclaimed another. But it wasn't just the headlines that surprised him. The photographs told a story of genuine family connection. Images of him laughing with his cousins, of Meghan in animated conversation with family members, of him and William standing together without the tension that had marked their previous public appearances. Even the comments are mostly positive, Meghan observed. People are saying they're happy to see the family together again. Harry's phone buzzed with a text from his private secretary, who had remained in California. Palace has been fielding calls all morning from organizations wanting to know about potential collaboration opportunities with your foundation. Thought you should know. It was followed immediately by another message, this one from his father's office. HRH would like to know if you and Meghan might have time for a private lunch before you return to California. Very informal, just family. Harry showed the message to Meghan, and she smiled. I'd like that. I feel like we only scratched the surface last night. They spent the morning walking through Hyde Park, something they had done countless times during their early relationship, but hadn't been able to do safely in years. Surprisingly, while people recognized them, the interactions were friendly rather than intrusive. A few asked for selfies, which they politely declined, but the overall atmosphere was one of goodwill rather than the aggressive curiosity they had grown accustomed to. It's strange, Meghan observed as they sat on a bench near the Serpentine. I feel like myself here in a way I hadn't expected to. Harry understood what she meant. For so long, London had felt like a place where they had to perform, where every gesture was scrutinized and interpreted. Now, somehow, it felt like a place where they could simply exist. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by Harry's phone ringing. He was surprised to see his brother's number on the screen. William. Harry, sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask you something before you leave London. William's voice sounded different than it had in years. Less formal, more like the brother Harry remembered from their childhood. What is it? Catherine and I were wondering if you and Meghan might want to bring Archie and Lilibet to meet George, Charlotte, and Louis. Not officially, nothing public, just cousins meeting cousins. The simplicity of the request hit Harry hard. For years, the idea of their children knowing each other had seemed impossible, caught up in all the complications of their adult relationships. Now William was offering exactly what Harry had hoped for, but never dared to ask. We'd love that, Harry said, his voice slightly rough with emotion. When we come back for Christmas, maybe? Perfect. Catherine's already planning what she'll cook for them. After they hung up, Harry sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Meghan took his hand, understanding without words what this meant to him. The lunch with Charles took place at Clarence's house, away from the formal atmosphere of Buckingham Palace. It was just the three of them, eating in the morning room where Harry had shared countless meals growing up. The conversation flowed more easily than any of them had expected. Charles asked about their work in California, and Harry found himself describing projects he was passionate about rather than defensive about choices they had made. Meghan talked about her advocacy work with genuine enthusiasm, and Charles listened with the kind of engaged attention he gave to subject he truly cared about. You know, Charles said during coffee, there might be ways to connect what you're doing with some of our initiatives here. Not formally, of course, but there are environmental projects, veteran support programs, youth development schemes that could benefit from international collaboration. The idea of working together rather than in opposition was revolutionary to Harry. For so long, it had seemed like they had to choose between their own path and their family connections. Now his father was suggesting that perhaps those two things could coexist. I'd be interested in exploring that, Harry said carefully, as long as we could maintain our independence. Of course, Charles replied immediately. What you've built in California is impressive precisely because it's authentically yours. I wouldn't want to change that. Meghan leaned forward. What if we started small? Maybe a joint environmental initiative, something that showcases both British innovation and American implementation. The three of them spent the next hour sketching out ideas, their excitement building as they discovered shared passions and complementary skills. It felt like the kind of family business discussion Harry had always hoped to have, but never thought would be possible. As they prepared to leave, Charles walked them to the car personally, something he had rarely done even during Harry's years as a working royal. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that whatever relationship we build going forward, it will be because we all want it, not because protocol demands it. You build a good life in California. Don't feel like you have to sacrifice that to have us in your lives, too." That evening, Harry and Meghan had dinner with some of their old friends from London, couples they had socialized with during their royal years who had maintained their friendships despite the geographical distance. The conversation was easy and warm, full of updates about children and careers and shared memories. "It's so good to see you both happy," one friend observed. "Really happy, not just putting on a brave face." Harry realized that was exactly right. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely settled rather than defensive, at peace with his choices rather than constantly justifying them. The next morning brought another surprise, a call from Eugenie asking if they had time for a quick breakfast before their flight. They met at a small cafe in Notting Hill, the kind of place they had frequented during their courting days. Eugenie had always been one of Harry's closest relatives, and she had maintained contact throughout the difficult years, but this felt different, more open, more hopeful. "I need to tell you something," she said after they had ordered. "Last night changed something for all of us. Not just you coming back, but the way everyone responded. I think we all remembered what family actually means." She paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "There were things said after you left, things that shouldn't have been said. Not by everyone, but by some people who should have known better. I want you to know that not all of us agreed with how it was handled." Harry appreciated her honesty. "We made mistakes too, Eugenie. Things we said publicly that we could have handled differently." "Maybe," she agreed. "But you were trying to protect your family. That's what parents do." The conversation turned to lighter topics, their children, mutual friends, plans for the future. But underneath the casual chat was something deeper, the reconstruction of family relationships that had been damaged but not destroyed. As they prepared to head to the airport, Harry found himself thinking about the 24 hours since they had arrived in London. So much had changed, not in terms of dramatic gestures or formal reconciliations, but in small moments of understanding and connection. His phone buzzed with one final message, this one from his grandmother's former lady-in-waiting. Her late Majesty would have been so proud to see the family together again. She always said that love would find a way. At the airport, they were approached by a representative from one of the charities Charles patronized. "We heard about your interest in collaborative projects," she said. "We'd love to discuss some ideas with you when you're ready." Even more surprisingly, they encountered several British journalists who had covered royal affairs for years. Instead of the adversarial questions Harry had grown to expect, they asked thoughtful questions about his work and expressed genuine interest in the positive developments with his family. "It seems like this visit has opened up new possibilities," one veteran reporter observed. "Are we likely to see more collaboration between your California work and British institutions?" "We'll see," Harry replied diplomatically. "But yes, there are some exciting opportunities we're exploring." As their plane taxied for takeoff, Harry and Meghan sat holding hands, both processing the whirlwind of emotions and revelations from their brief visit. "Do you think it will last?" Meghan asked quietly. "This feeling that we can have both things, our independence and our family." Harry considered the question seriously. "I think it will take work from all of us, and there will probably be setbacks. But yes, I think it's possible now in a way it wasn't before." He thought about his children, who would grow up knowing their grandfather, and their cousins, who would understand both their British heritage and their American identity. He thought about the work he and Meghan were doing, which might now find new expressions and collaborations. Most of all, he thought about the possibility of being fully himself while still belonging to something larger. As London disappeared beneath the clouds, Harry felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the anticipation of coming home again. Not because he had to, not because duty demanded it, but because he wanted to, because home had become a place where he was welcome as he was, rather than as others needed him to be. The reconciliation was far from complete. There would be difficult conversations ahead, practical challenges to navigate, and the ongoing challenge of balancing public expectations with private family relationships. But for the first time in years, Harry believed that all of those challenges were surmountable. Their California life awaited them, with its freedoms and opportunities and the family they had built there. But now it was enhanced rather than isolated by the knowledge that their British family was there too, ready to welcome them home whenever they chose to return. 3 weeks after their return to California, Harry stood in his home office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, participating in his first video call with his father's environmental team in London. On his desk lay architectural plans for a sustainable housing development that would serve as a joint project between his foundation and the Prince's Trust, bridging their shared commitment to community development and environmental stewardship. The solar panel integration looks excellent. Charles's voice came through the speakers, and Harry could hear genuine enthusiasm in his father's tone. Have you considered adding wind power as well? Meghan entered the office carrying 2 cups of coffee and a tablet displaying messages from potential partners across both the United States and the United Kingdom. What had begun as a tentative conversation about collaboration had exploded into a dozen different opportunities, each one representing a way to combine their independent work with family connections. The wind patterns here would definitely support small turbines, Harry replied to his father. Meghan's been working with local environmental groups who have experience with residential wind power. Through the screen, he could see his father making notes, completely engaged in the technical details. This was a relationship Harry had always hoped they could have, based on shared interests and mutual respect rather than obligation and expectation. After the call ended, Harry found Meghan in their garden, playing with Archie and Lilibet. The children were building what Archie called a palace out of blocks, and Harry smiled as he heard his son explaining to his sister that Grandpa Charles lives in a real palace in London. The children's easy acceptance of their expanded family connections had been one of the most heartening aspects of the past few weeks. Video calls with their grandfather had become a regular part of their routine, and they looked forward to seeing the horses and gardens at the various royal residences that Charles described to them. Uncle William called while you were on with your father, Meghan said, looking up from the block construction project. He wants to set up a call with all the cousins so the children can meet virtually before Christmas. The idea of their children having relationships with their royal cousins was still somewhat surreal to Harry, but it was exactly what he had hoped for. William had been true to his word about keeping things simple and family-focused rather than formal and complicated. And I had an interesting call with the Earthshot Prize team, Meghan continued. They want to discuss having one of our California environmental projects as an American entry for next year's competition. The Earthshot Prize was William's signature environmental initiative, and the idea of their work being connected to it represented exactly the kind of family collaboration Harry had never dared to hope for. What kind of timeline are they thinking? Harry asked, settling on the grass beside his family. They want to visit next month to see the work firsthand. William might even come himself. The prospect of William visiting California, seeing their life there, meeting their friends and colleagues, represented another step toward the integration of their 2 worlds that Harry was still learning to navigate. That evening, Harry received a call that would have seemed impossible just a month earlier. His private secretary in London was calling to relay an invitation from the Prime Minister to participate in a Commonwealth Environmental Summit, not as a representative of the royal family, but as an independent advocate whose work had gained international recognition. They specifically want you to present the California model for sustainable community development, his secretary explained. It will be a chance to showcase American innovation to a British and Commonwealth audience. Harry found himself considering the invitation seriously. A month ago, any official engagement in the UK would have felt loaded with complications and expectations. Now, it felt like an opportunity to contribute meaningfully to causes he cared about. What does my father think? He asked, knowing that royal family members would need to be consulted about any high-profile appearances. His Royal Highness thinks it's an excellent idea. He said it would demonstrate that family members can serve the public good in many different ways, not just through traditional royal duties. The shift in perspective was remarkable. Instead of seeing his independent work as a rejection of royal values, his family was beginning to see it as an extension of them, a new model for public service that honored tradition while embracing innovation. Over the following days, Harry and Meghan found themselves busier than they had been in years, but with work that felt genuinely meaningful rather than merely obligatory. They were developing educational programs that would connect British schools with California environmental projects, planning cultural exchanges that would give young people on both sides of the Atlantic exposure to different approaches to social challenges, and exploring ways to use their unique position to bridge divides rather than deepen them. The transformation in media coverage was equally remarkable. Instead of focusing on conflict and division, journalists began writing about the new model of royal engagement the couple was pioneering, one that allowed for independence while maintaining family connections, that valued authentic passion over dutiful compliance, and that demonstrated how traditional institutions could evolve without losing their essential character. "We're being asked to do a documentary about modern royal families," Meghan told Harry one morning as they walked along the beach near their home. "Not about our personal struggles, but about how families can support individual growth while maintaining collective identity." The idea appealed to Harry because it would allow them to share their story in their own words, focusing on solutions rather than problems, on hope rather than conflict. "What would we want to say?" he asked. "That love is stronger than tradition, but that tradition doesn't have to be the enemy of love. That families can be complex and still be functional. That home can be more than one place." As December approached, the question of Christmas became increasingly real. Charles had issued a formal invitation for them to join the family at Sandringham, but he had been careful to emphasize that there was no pressure, that they should only come if it felt right for their family. The decision ultimately came down to a conversation with Archie and Lilibet, when Harry explained that they could spend Christmas either in California or in England with their royal grandparents, cousins, and aunts and uncles. Both children were immediately excited about the prospect of a British Christmas. "Will there be snow?" Archie asked hopefully. "Will we get to see the palace?" Lilibet wanted to know. Their enthusiasm made the decision easy, but Harry still felt nervous as he called his father to confirm their attendance. "We'd love to come for Christmas," he said simply. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Harry wondered if the call had been dropped. Then he heard his father's voice, thick with emotion. "That's wonderful news, Harry. Truly wonderful." The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with preparations that felt both foreign and familiar. Meghan worked with palace staff to understand the family's holiday traditions, while also sharing some of their own customs that might be incorporated. Harry found himself explaining British Christmas traditions to his children, who were fascinated by the idea of Christmas crackers and Boxing Day walks. But perhaps the most significant preparation was a series of private conversations Harry had with family members, clearing the air about past hurts and establishing ground rules for their visit that would protect everyone's emotional well-being. His conversation with William was particularly important. The brothers spoke honestly about their different perspectives on royal duty, their different approaches to public service, and their shared commitment to their families. They didn't agree on everything, but they found ways to respect their differences while celebrating their common ground. "We don't have to be the same to be brothers," William said during one of their calls. "Maybe we never understood that before." As their departure for London approached, Harry found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that nervous car ride to his father's birthday celebration just 2 months earlier. They weren't the same people who had left royal life in search of independence, and the royal family wasn't the same institution that had struggled to accommodate their needs. Both sides had evolved, learned, and grown. The result wasn't a return to the status quo, but something entirely new, a model of family relationships that honored both tradition and innovation, both collective identity and individual authenticity. On the plane to London, as Archie and Lilibet slept beside them, Harry and Meghan talked quietly about their hopes and expectations for the holiday ahead. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "A little," Harry admitted, "but not about whether we'll be welcome. I know we will be. I'm nervous about whether we can make this sustainable long-term. Meghan nodded. It'll take work from everyone. But I think we all want enough to do that work. As London appeared below them through the airplane windows, Harry felt a familiar mixture of excitement and anticipation. But this time, it was the feeling of coming home rather than returning to a place where he didn't quite fit. The Christmas ahead wouldn't be perfect. No family gathering ever was. There would probably be awkward moments, disagreements, and the ongoing challenge of navigating their public roles alongside their private relationships. But it would be theirs, a new kind of royal Christmas that honored the past while creating space for the future, that celebrated tradition while making room for change, and that proved that love really could overcome even the most complicated family dynamics. As their plane touched down at Heathrow, Harry realized that the most important gift of the season had already been given, the opportunity to be both independent and connected, both authentically themselves and genuinely part of something larger. The reunion that had begun with a birthday celebration had become something much more significant. The birth of a new model for how families could love each other across differences, how traditions could evolve without losing their meaning, and how home could exist in multiple places at once. The story that had begun with separation and sadness was being rewritten as one of reconciliation and hope, proving that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that bring us back to where we started, but with new understanding of what home really means.